Kneeling before the battered elven girl, he gently wrapped her injured hand and made a solemn vow. Bestowing upon her the name Resser, he swore that he would heal her spirit and body, giving her a chance to be reborn. In the busy town streets, his careful hands placed a fresh bandage over a young child's scraped knee, assuring the little one that the wound had been disinfected and would heal without trouble. With a warm and gentle smile, he watched as the children cheered in relief and scurried back to play, reminding them to stay safe as they shouted back their heartfelt thanks to their trusted apothecary. Pulling out his shopping list to map out his errands for the day, he was suddenly interrupted by a call from the local pawn shop owner, who hailed him excitedly from his doorway. Pausing in his tracks, he inquired if the shopkeeper was suffering from his chronic back pain once again, but the man shook his head, indicating that this visit was about something entirely different. Curious, he followed the shopkeeper's gesture as the man beckoned him inside, leaving the apothecary bewildered as to what could require such privacy. Stepping into the dim interior, he listened as the shopkeeper explained that an influential figure had foisted a troublesome burden upon him, something he believed the skilled apothecary might be uniquely suited to help with. His eyes widened in shock as he peered into the shadowy back room, discovering a severely traumatized elven girl covered in bandages, her terrified gaze locking onto his. She sat huddled on the cold stone floor, a broken shell of a creature who had been worked to absolute exhaustion and callously discarded. As the shopkeeper callously suggested that an elf's body could be harvested as a universal remedy if only he possessed the right connections, the apothecary knelt beside the child to begin his examination. Methodically assessing her condition, he discovered horrors beyond belief. Her left eye was missing, her pupils unresponsive, her nails ripped away, and nearly all her teeth pulled, while deep whip scars and advancing gangrene ravaged her flesh. Horrified by how anyone could inflict such cruelty, he gently spoke to her, noting a slight twitch in her pierced ears that proved she could still hear despite her extensive trauma. Realizing that leaving her in this place meant certain death, a strong conviction took root in his mind that he had to save and protect her. Looking up at him with her single remaining eye filled with tears, the fragile girl feebly rasped her heart-wrenching plea to return home. Hearing her simple, heartbreaking desire, a wish that had undoubtedly been crushed time and again, filled him with intense resolve while the shopkeeper pressed for an answer. Laughing callously, the merchant offered to sell her cheap as raw material, eager to rid himself of a dying creature before she became a total loss. Unable to bear the callous cruelty any longer, he firmly declared that he would take the girl himself. Upon hearing his words, a faint glimmer of hope passed over the young girl's delicate, tear-streaked face. She watched in silence as the shopkeeper voiced his utter astonishment, amazed that the apothecary intended to carry her all the way across the mountain on his own without even accepting a proper frame. Speaking in a soft, reassuring voice, he gently draped a hooded cloth over her head, promising that he would not cause her any harm while securing her to keep her from falling. Beneath the shade of the hood, her wide eye flickered with quiet uncertainty, unaccustomed to receiving even the simplest form of consideration. Glancing down at her subtle shift in expression, he wondered solemnly what thoughts were running through her traumatized mind in that moment. As he pulled the ties taut, a heavy realization weighed on him. This girl had become far too accustomed to being treated as nothing more than a piece of cargo. Bound securely against his back alongside his heavy travel pack, she remained completely passive, offering not the slightest resistance. Leaving the shadowy bazaar behind, they set out toward the dense wilderness surrounding the fortified mountain township. His heavy leather boots dug into the rough, root-covered forest terrain, maintaining a steady and determined stride. Leaning on a wooden walking staff, he gently advised her to brace herself, explaining that they would be taking a rougher shortcut through the woods to save time. Perspiration beaded on his forehead from the strenuous climb, while she quietly pressed against his back, silently absorbing the unfamiliar warmth of someone carrying her burden. She remained silently bound to his back as he wiped the heavy sweat from his brow, his body straining under the weight of the arduous mountain ascent. As dusk began to settle over the valley, he decided to halt their trek for the night, gently setting her down and removing the heavy cloth mask covering her face so she could rest comfortably before their final push tomorrow. Leaving her to sit against a fallen log, he set out to prepare a meal, noticing how the quiet woodland air seemed to soften her tense expression, as if the forest itself granted her a brief moment of peace. Sitting beside a crackling campfire, he carefully stirred a pot of soft, warm porridge, tasting a small spoonful to ensure it would be easy enough for her fragile body to swallow. Nearby, her nose twitched softly as the rich, inviting steam drifted toward her, awakening senses long dulled by confinement. He glanced over and observed her reaction, realizing with quiet satisfaction that her sense of smell was functioning intact. Kneeling beside her with the freshly cooked food, he extended a wooden spoon, gently reassuring her to take all the time she needed to eat. She parted her lips hesitantly as the warm spoon brushed against her mouth, cautiously accepting the nourishment. The comforting broth glided smoothly down her throat, providing immediate warmth to her depleted strength. As she began chewing, thick tears unexpectedly welled up in her eyes, prompting him to react with sudden worry, anxiously asking if the food was far too hot for her. She chewed softly, swallowing every spoonful offered by the young man sitting beside her. Watching her eat with a gentle smile, he softly asked if the warm food suited her taste. She continued to eat quietly under his careful watch, leaning against the trunk of a massive forest tree. After gently wiping her mouth clean, he decided it was best for them to halt their journey and rest there for the day. Tears welled up silently in her eye, glistening brightly as they trickled down her cheek. As night fell, the full moon rose high above the dark forest canopy, casting a calm light over their campsite. Later that night, she tossed fitfully on the ground, groaning as a severe fever took hold of her fragile body. Placing a hand to her burning forehead, he realized her fever was dangerously high, wondering if it was caused by exhaustion, severe wound inflammation, or a deeper internal infection. Opening his apothecary chest, he resolved to quickly prepare a medicinal brew with antipyretic and antibacterial properties. After grinding elderflower, wild borage, and a crushed magic stone into a decoction tempered with honey and salt, he cradled her weakened body and urged her to drink the harsh remedy. He carefully lifted her head, coaxing the warm potion past her lips and encouraging her to swallow slowly as her body trembled from the fever. Swallowing the bitter liquid with difficulty, she stirred in delirium, her weak voice trailing off as she disorientedly questioned where she was. Gazing down at her suffering form, he offered a quiet, resolute promise, assuring her that she would surely find her way back to her homeland. To soothe her burning brow, he gently laid a cool, damp cloth over her forehead, urging her to drift off and rest. With painstaking tenderness, his hand remained upon the compress until her breathing slowly steadied into slumber. As night fell over the dense forest, the small campsite remained an isolated beacon of warmth against the surrounding darkness. Watching over the sleeping girl, the echo of his own words continued to reverberate in his mind. Sitting alone before the crackling fire, a heavy doubt took root as he wondered if he had uttered a promise he lacked the power to fulfill. He recognized that her suffering was wrought by his own kind, the Irtanos, on a continent where 5 distinct races had been trapped in mutual hatred and distrust since the Great War 80 years ago. Yet his determination to return her home remained steadfast. While he viewed racial differences as simple physical and cultural variations, he pondered how deeply systemic prejudice ran, from ignorant men like the shopkeeper who inflicted harm without a second thought to those who refused to see other races as human at all. He sat frozen in cold realization, dwelling on the harsh truth that humans did not even consider non-humans to be real people. As those haunting thoughts took hold, grotesque shadowy hands surged from the darkness, dragging him down into the harrowing depths of his past. Looking down in horror, he saw his own palms stained black with blood while ghostly skulls rose around him in silent accusation. The tormenting spectral screams echoed inside his mind, branding him an unforgivable murderer. Suddenly, the terrifying nightmare fractured, replaced by the soft morning light revealing his actual, clean hands. Breathing heavily, he stared silently at his unblemished palms as gentle morning birds chirped around him. Sitting alone in the quiet wilderness as dawn broke over the mountains, he questioned whether the horrifying vision had merely been a bad dream. Nearby, the young elf began to stir, her fever finally breaking as clarity returned to her eye and she noticed him keeping watch over her. Observing her regain consciousness, he offered a reassuring smile and greeted her warmly, letting her know he was going to help her sit up. Though relieved that her temperature had dropped, he knew they could not afford to lower their guard, steeling his resolve to do whatever necessary to honor her wish of returning home. His sole objective was to treat her, driven by the hope that she might one day reclaim a life as close as possible to the one she had lost. Even though dark memories continued to label him a murderer and the road ahead would demand immense time and effort, he clenched his fist with unyielding resolve. Looking into her eyes, he confessed his desire to help, acknowledging that her spirit was deeply wounded alongside her body, and though he knew nothing of her past, he wanted to mend her completely. Reaching out to clasp her bandaged hand gently in his own, he explained that there was a single gesture he desperately wanted to offer her. That singular gift was a new name, one imbued with a genuine wish for her future. Kneeling before her beneath the canopy of trees, he held her hands tenderly and named her Resser, promising that just as the name signified rebirth, he would heal her until she was truly made whole. Her wide, luminous eye caught the morning light, reflecting the profound impact of his solemn oath. Turning his thoughts toward the day ahead, he suggested they eat breakfast before continuing their trek toward the workshop. Over a small outdoor fire, a cooking pot filled with savory broth bubbled rhythmically in the morning calm. Lifting a warm bowl with a wooden spoon in hand, he offered her a soft, reassuring smile and announced that breakfast was ready. He addressed her gently by her newly given name, Resser, watching as her wide, expressive eyes reacted to the quiet solemnity of his voice. Above them, the morning light broke through the canopy, illuminating the soft skies as a fresh sense of hope settled over the morning air. Overlooking the vast forest stretching toward the sunlit mountains, he softly invited her to share breakfast, signaling the true commencement of their journey toward her complete. Arriving at a quiet rural settlement, the apothecary carried the injured elven girl on his back, softly announcing that they had reached the place where she would now live. Stepping inside the modest wooden house, he gently lowered her onto a couch, reassuring her that this safe haven was indeed her new home. Suggesting that they should take a bath first, he noticed her hesitant reaction and quickly offered to step outside for a moment, asking her to wait comfortably until he returned. Outside, a firm knock echoed against the door of a neighboring cottage, answered by a cheery voice from within. As the door swung open, little Moan burst out with glee upon recognizing the apothecary, eagerly inquiring if he had brought the sweets she had requested. Her elder sister quickly chided the girl for being demanding, but he interjected to assure them that it was fine, explaining that he had actually come to ask a favor of his own. Surprised by his rare request, the young woman listened attentively as he shared the circumstance requiring her assistance. Generously obliging, she gathered a neat stack of her own former clothing, presenting them with the explanation that the string fasteners would make them easily adjustable for the newcomer. Expressing his deep gratitude for her kindness, he accepted the garments while she warmly offered further support whenever he might need it. Inside his home, he filled a deep wooden tub with warm water, preparing to tend to the young elven girl's condition. Steam rose gently from the surface of the bath, creating a quiet space away from the harsh realities outside. Gently, he untied the binding wrapped around her frame, letting her ruined garments fall away to the floor. As he began to wash her, he noticed she showed no reaction at all, even as she sat completely undressed. Her back was a horrifying canvas of deep, crisscrossing marks that revealed just how severely she had suffered. The severe scars resurfaced like permanent memories of malice, etched deeply into her flesh by relentless cruelty. Dark bruises encircled her neck and shoulders, evidence of having been tightly bound and constricted with extreme, suffocating force. Most haunting of all were the distinct, permanent imprints of human fingers, pressed into her skin as stark proof of severe physical restraint. Fury surged within him as he questioned who could have committed such horrific atrocities against her. Suppressing his rage, he forced himself to stay calm and focus entirely on the immediate task of treating her wounds. Resolving to start by treating her external injuries first, he meticulously prepared the necessary remedies at her bedside. He carefully applied an herbal ointment to the scars to accelerate healing, covered them with specialized medicine, and placed a cloth soaked in slime fluid on top, noting that the dressings would need to be changed every 3 days. He gently helped the silent elf into a set of clean, dry clothes, taking care not to aggravate her bandaged wounds. Taking up a wooden comb left among the supplies, he carefully worked through her long, tangled locks, realizing with a touch of gratitude that the village woman must have thoughtfully provided it for her care. Once dressed and groomed, she sat motionless upon the wooden chair, looking far more composed beneath her fresh bandages and simple corset dress. Looking upon her transformed appearance, a wave of bittersweet relief washed over him. Though he wondered if it was mere self-satisfaction, seeing her present state was a far cry from the battered body he had rescued, and the exhaustion of the ordeal began to weigh heavily on him as he prepared a simple meal. Carrying 2 steaming bowls to the table, he apologized for the delay, only to pause when he noticed her body squirming and trembling uncontrollably in the chair, prompting him to ask if she was feeling cold or running a fever again before suddenly realizing the true reason for her distress. Embarrassed by his own obliviousness, he gasped as he blurted out whether she was desperately trying to hold in the urge to use the lavatory. After hurriedly helping her tend to her basic needs and apologizing profusely for his insensitivity, he sat across from her to feed her porridge, pondering how despite her usual lack of emotional expression, she still possessed basic human dignity. He wondered if delicious food might slowly open her heart, though her lack of intact teeth posed a problem that might require crafted dentures. As he patiently fed her spoonful by spoonful, deeper medical anxieties plagued his mind. Concern for her internal organ damage, the lingering threat of limb necrosis, and the grim possibility of amputation, forcing him to consider seeking assistance from a formidable fellow physician he knew. Noticing her weary gaze and frail posture after the meal, he decided she had endured enough strain for the day and gently scooped her up into his arms to carry her back to bed. Resting her tenderly against the soft pillows, he pulled the covers over her shoulders, allowing the exhausted elf to finally sink into a peaceful, restorative sleep. She finally drifted into a quiet, undisturbed sleep, resting her battered body beneath the blankets. Watching over her, the apothecary observed her soft breathing with relief, noting that she seemed to have found some peace at last. As he sat by her bedside, he pondered the extent of her severe injuries, wishing for a miraculous medicine that could restore her lost eyes and limbs. A sudden realization struck him. He remembered hearing of the High Potion, a secret elixir capable of physical regeneration, whose existence had been confirmed to him by a trusted acquaintance. He considered attempting to brew such a potion himself, yet he quickly acknowledged the stark limits of his current equipment and knowledge. Unwilling to take reckless risks with her life, he bowed his head beside her, agonizing as he searched for another way forward. After dispatching a messenger bird with a letter, the apothecary stepped outside into the yard. Turning to the elven girl resting on the porch, he noted that her condition had stabilized somewhat, reassuring her that he would be working nearby if she needed anything. Tending to his garden with a heavy hoe, he reflected on the necessity of cultivating his own medicinal ingredients right at home. Meanwhile, sitting quietly on the porch, the elven girl turned her gaze toward the distant trees, caught in her own thoughts. Tears welled in her eyes as the familiar sense of the forest and the wooden home overwhelmed her senses, releasing a quiet sob. Unaware of her silent tears, he continued to turn the soil nearby, maintaining his steady work. The quiet routine was interrupted when young Moan arrived with a cheerful greeting. The apothecary welcomed her warmly, asking if she was there to help with deliveries, but her attention was immediately stolen by the visitor resting inside the house. Exclaiming in delight upon seeing the patient in person, the little girl approached the sofa. He gently introduced her properly, confirming her name was reserved to the excited child. When Moan eagerly asked for permission to speak with their guest, he readily agreed. He pondered that interacting with someone other than himself might provide a gentle, positive stimulus for the elven girl's recovery. Settling on the couch beside Reser, Moan began to gently comfort her with soft gestures. Meanwhile, the apothecary opened an ancient reference text, turning his focus to the next stage of her care. Consulting the old diagrams, he determined to craft a custom set of dentures for her. Carefully carving and shaping raw boar tusks at his workbench to replace her missing teeth. As he labored over the delicate carving, Moan leaned in closer to the silent elven girl and called out to him, asking why their guest remained so completely quiet and refused to speak. Her innocent curiosity was met with a thoughtful silence before the apothecary softly murmured his response, considering the delicate situation. Looking over at the quiet elven girl, he reflected that perhaps she had simply not yet found a reason to break her silence. Suddenly struck by an idea, the little girl's eyes lit up with sudden inspiration, prompting her to spring into action. Moments later, she proudly presented her creation, a delicate woven flower crown placed gently atop the elf's hair, beaming with joy as she called for his attention. Playfully teasing that the pretty maiden looked like a bride, the young child sent him into a flustered panic as he quickly insisted she was merely his patient, though he gently praised the child's skillful craft. After bidding the cheerful girl farewell, he watched her depart back toward the village, leaving the cottage quiet once more. Turning back to his patient, he observed her clutching her hands in her lap, overwhelmed to tears by the child's simple kindness. He realized that mending her deeply scarred spirit would take countless tender moments like this. Having spent countless hours examining her frail state and painstakingly sculpting replacement teeth late into the night, his diligent labor was finally complete. Approaching her with the finished piece, he gently guided the custom denture into place as she quietly opened her mouth to receive it. Looking down at her with quiet warmth, he softly announced that they would celebrate the completion of her new teeth that very evening. He set to work preparing a special meal, searing a thick steak gifted to him by a local farmer in a heavy skillet. Taking special care, he marinated the tender meat in liquor and scored it with delicate crossguts to make it easy to chew before offering a piece to Rizur. As she guided the bite into her mouth, he leaned in and quietly asked how it tasted, watching carefully to see if her new dentures worked comfortably. She gazed back at him with wide, wonder-struck eyes, leaving him temporarily speechless at the pure emotion shining across her face. Soft, gentle sniffles began to escape her as the rich flavor settled on her palate. Even as tears began to form, she hungrily took another bite, prompting him to gently remind her that there was plenty left and she should eat slowly. Slowly and carefully, she chewed the savory meat, feeling her new teeth bite into solid food without any pain. Tears spilled over and ran down her bandaged cheeks, a quiet release of long-suppressed emotion. Seeing her weep, he offered a reassuring smile and remarked on how delicious it was, as she continued eating through her tears. Looking into each other's eyes, a profound sense of warmth passed between them, celebrating the simple yet transformative joy of being able to eat together again. He sat beside her, gently offering another piece of food and asking if she was feeling happy. Watching her interact with visiting villagers, he quietly noted how her sensory responses were returning, contemplating that her speech might recover much sooner than initially expected. But just as hope began to take root, a sudden, alarming change took place within her. Her eyes abruptly widened in agony, dark bloodshot veins spiderwebbing across her iris as a violent internal shock overtook her body. In the kitchen, unaware of the immediate danger, he was preparing a rich beef stew to satisfy her growing appetite when a violent coughing fit shattered the quiet house. Turning around in sheer panic, he caught sight of her collapsing heavily onto the floorboards. Dropping everything, he rushed to her side, gathering her trembling, convulsing body into his arms. Horror gripped him as he held her writhing frame, utterly baffled as to why her condition had plummeted so drastically after days of steady recovery. Examining her frantically, he observed the agonizing symptoms tearing through her body. Her chest flared with severe inflammation, her muscles locked in violent spasms, and asphyxiation threatened to end her life. Recognizing the distinct signs, a grim realization struck him with terrifying clarity. It was the neurotoxic venom of the obsidian spider, a deadly poison derived from timid yet lethal arachnids, long utilized throughout history for high-profile assassinations. Knowing that no one in the peaceful village possessed the knowledge or desire to administer such an insidious toxin, his mind raced through the timeline, trying to determine when the poison had been introduced into her system. Realizing her former cruel master must have inflicted a delayed poison before her escape, He refused to let her die and rushed to his apothecary tools, desperate to formulate an antidote before the dormant venom proved fatal. Acting quickly to save her life, the apothecary prepared a mixture of ground charcoal to absorb the toxin and senna to counteract its effects. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he carefully poured the dark liquid down her throat, praying the treatment would work in time. The bitter brew forced her body to purge the toxins, and he held her gently, encouraging her to let everything out into the bowl below. Groaning in discomfort, she continued to vomit into the basin while he kept a firm, supporting hand against her back. Among the regurgitated fluid lay an intact, strange shell-like object carved with intricate symbols. Picking up the strange capsule with chopsticks, he realized it was not a standard pill, but rather a protective shell engineered to dissolve slowly inside her stomach. Examining the mysterious markings on its surface, his eyes widened in shock as he recognized them as ancient cursed runes. Fury mounted within him as he understood the cruel intent behind it. Someone had fed her a delayed-action poison, so she would die far away, shielding the perpetrator from suspicion. Outside, the morning sun bathed the quiet apothecary house, oblivious to the dark conspiracy that had almost claimed the young elf's life. The elven girl lay motionless upon the bed, her breath coming in ragged, feverish gasps as the poison ran its course. Looking on with heavy hearts, the village woman and young Moan could barely contain their tears at the sight of her agonizing condition. Fully equipped for a dangerous trek, the apothecary explained that she was suffering from a monster's potent venom, making it imperative for him to venture out into the wilds to harvest antidote ingredients, while reassuring them that they could manage her care in his absence. Handing over a carefully detailed list of instructions, he promised to return within 3 days and urged her to follow the written steps to help mitigate the poison's deadly progression. His dark eyes narrowed with grim resolve, fully aware of the grave stakes ahead. Preparing for the worst-case scenario, he solemnly asked her to arrange funeral preparations should the victim succumb before his return, desperate to ensure she would not be left abandoned in death. She accepted the written note quietly, understanding the harsh reality of his words and acknowledging the weight of her duty. Suddenly, she shoved both hands forcefully against his chest, passionately barking out that everything would be all right. She boldly insisted that they would take proper care of the elven girl, commanding him to focus entirely on doing his part without despairing. Backed by their unyielding spirit, a sense of hope remained that the fragile patient would fight with all her strength to endure until his return. As she lay resting in the background, the village woman confidently struck her chest, assuring him that he could leave everything in their care. Touched by her determination, he offered a quiet, heartfelt word of thanks, emotion glistening in his eyes. Turning toward the bed where the elven girl lay motionless, he looked upon her one last time before stepping toward the threshold. With fierce resolve in his eyes, he silently swore that he would return with the cure and save her life, no matter the cost. Tears welled in her eyes as his desperate plea echoed in her heart, urging her to hold on until his return. Setting out into the wilderness, he swiftly gathered the necessary components for the remedy, harvesting a mandragora root, excavating element converting mana quartz, and finally tracking his destination to a dark cavern. Standing before the cavern entrance, he recalled that obtaining the final ingredient required the innards of an obsidian spider, glad that his prior scouting of their habitat would now save critical time. As he gripped his bow and ventured into the pitch-black tunnels, the familiar weight of the weapon reawakened combat instincts he had not drawn upon in a very long time. Illuminating the cavern path with a glowing light, he pushed deeper into the damp, subterranean corridors, remaining vigilant for any sign of his target. Spotting massive spider webs stretched across the cavern roof, he raised his light source, confirming that he had indeed arrived at the nest of the venomous creatures. Reaching back to draw an arrow from his quiver, he fixes his eyes on the monstrous spiders lurking in the cavern darkness ahead. Knowing every second counts, he swiftly nocks an arrow and prepares to strike. Drawing the bowstring taut, he locks his gaze on a massive spider looming directly before him, offering a quick apology as he declares that he has no time to waste. His arrow flies true, impaling the beast, yet a grim thought crosses his mind. If his physical strikes fail to neutralize these monsters instantly, the situation will quickly spiral out of control. Before he can reposition, another creature screeches violently and lunges at him with terrifying speed, forcing his eyes wide in sudden alarm as he barely has time to react. As the threat presses close, memories of the traumatized elven girl flash through his mind, hardening his resolve to stay sharp and draw upon his past combat mastery for her sake. Channeling his magical power, he invokes a potent spell, Aruma, manifesting an intricate, glowing magic circle that hurls a radiant spell projectile forward. The magical strike pierces the monster with devastating force, igniting the creature in a surge of dazzling light as it shrieks in agony. Standing firm amidst the explosive aftermath, he watches intently as the spell completely obliterates his target, leaving behind only shattered remnants. Dropping beside the defeated monster, he draws a short blade and carefully cuts into its carcass to harvest the vital obsidian spider innards. Catching his breath as he secures the rare ingredient in his pouch, he turns toward the cavern exit, determined to race back immediately and synthesize the cure. Having finalized the antidote, the apothecary carefully draws the liquid remedy into a leather pouch, apologizing to the young elf for keeping her waiting while the mother and daughter watch quietly in the background. He tenderly cradles the weakened elf, gently administering the medication while softly reassuring her that she will recover very soon. As night falls over the tranquil countryside, quiet settles upon the small medical quarters beneath the glowing moon. Inside the dimly lit room, the apothecary sits steadfastly at her bedside, refusing to leave her side as she rests upon the bed. He watches her attentively as slight groans escape her lips, keeping a vigil over every small shift in her state. Noticing the faint flush on her skin gradually fade, he takes comfort in seeing her labored breathing return to a steady, calm rhythm. He gently clasps her bandaged hand, relieved to confirm that the critical crisis of her condition has finally subsided. Squeezing her hand warmly, he offers reassuring words of comfort while she softly murmurs his name in her sleep, resting securely at last. As he kept his watchful vigil, deep within her subconscious, dark oppressive vines wrapped around her spirit in pitch-black waters. Slowly, her weary eye fluttered open beneath the suffocating tangle. She remained trapped in the murky depths of her mind, surrounded by the heavy weight of her past trauma and illness. Yet, through the darkness, a comforting voice reached down, accompanied by an outstretched hand descending from a warm, brilliant light above. That glowing hand offered salvation, its reflection gleaming in her pupil as reassuring words promised that everything would be all right. Breaking free from the nightmare, her eyes opened in the real world, greeted by soft sunlight flooding the quiet bedroom. Sitting right beside her bed was her savior, his familiar silhouette framed against the morning glow. Looking into his exhausted yet gentle eyes, a deep sense of relief washed over her, dispelling the last remnants of fear. Tears welled in her eyes as he softly noted that she had finally awoken from her long ordeal. He leaned forward attentively to ask if her sight had returned clearly, to which she admitted her vision remained hazy, though she could feel his steady, comforting presence right beside her. Her quiet recognition brought a sudden, overwhelming wave of relief over him, his tense features softening into a gentle, exhausted expression. As soft daylight filtered through the window curtains, she weakly agreed to sit up so he could properly examine her condition. Placing his hands gently upon her shoulders and checking her response, he noted with relief that her fever and skin inflammation had receded. Though her vision remained severely impaired, the subtle contraction of her pupils confirmed that her eyes could now perceive light. He reasoned that the combined medicinal properties of mandragora and magic quartz had not only neutralized the lethal poison in her bloodstream, but had also stimulated her damaged optic nerves to trigger physical recovery. However, as he leaned closer to examine her facial features, he gasped in surprise when a large, glistening tear welled in her eye and spilled down her cheek. Noticing her entire frame trembling uncontrollably, he quickly asked if she was in pain or feeling unwell. Looking up through her blurred vision, she softly whispered the name he had been calling her, assuming it was her own. He gently clarified that he had only assigned her that temporary moniker because he did not know her actual identity, asking if she could tell him her real name. To his dismay, she wept openly as she confessed that she had no memory of her name or anything about her past. Recognizing the symptoms of severe retrograde amnesia, he pondered the dire implications. Without her memories, she would never be able to navigate the hidden routes required to return to the secretive realm of the elves. As she hesitated, attempting to speak through her confusion, he sat beside her in resolute determination, swearing to himself that he would find a way to safely guide her back home. Before he could say another word, the elven girl looked up at him through tear-filled eyes, expressing her profound gratitude to him for rescuing her. His eyes widened in quiet surprise as her sincere words hit him, dispelling the lingering gloom in his mind. Rebuking himself for falling into such dark pessimism, he turned toward her, ready to change his perspective and offer her genuine comfort. Leaning forward, he made a resolute promise, assuring her that she had nothing to fear because he would personally see to her complete recovery. Moved by his conviction, she let out a soft breath and smiled through her tears, accepting the quiet reassurance of his pledge. Outside the house, the kindly woman expressed her relief at the elven girl's recovery, offering to bake a cake in celebration and asking if she enjoyed sweet treats. She admitted softly that she did enjoy sweets, prompting a joyful cheer from the young girl beside her. Hearing the exchange, the apothecary tried to rise and offer his help, but the woman instantly forced him back down into his seat, ordering him to rest. She and the child leaned in close, pointing out the heavy bags beneath his eyes and scolding him for constantly neglecting his sleep. Touching his weary face, he timidly asked if he truly looked that terrible, receiving an emphatic, unanimous confirmation from both of them. Watching him silently, the elven girl voiced her own concern, reminding him that after everything it took for her to awaken, they would be lost if he collapsed from exhaustion now. Reaching across the table, the woman set a steaming mug right in front of him. She offered a gentle smile, reminding him that everyone needs to rely on others from time to time and urging him to leave the remaining tasks to her. Wrapping his hands around the warm cup, he finally relented and quietly thanked her, accepting her help while she gave a confident thumbs up. He took a slow, quiet sip from the steaming mug, allowing the gentle warmth to wash over his weary body. Watching him from across the table, the elven girl shared a soft, compassionate glance, thankful to see him finally pause to rest. As the exhaustion took its toll, his heavy eyelids fluttered and closed, allowing a long-overdue slumber to take hold. As sleep claimed him, memory dragged his consciousness back into the painful past, to a time when he was just a desperate, ragged boy running for his life across open fields while angry shouts called him a thief. Cruel taunts quickly turned into violence as the angry villagers hurled stones at the helpless child, driving him out into the wilderness and leaving him battered upon the dusty ground. Driven far beyond the borders of the village, the small, bruised boy curled into a ball under the wide branches of a lone tree, utterly abandoned. Hugging his knees tight against his chest, tears welled in his dark eyes as he wept in silent, crushing isolation. In the midst of his sorrow, a sudden shadow fell across the dirt before him, accompanied by the quiet thud of heavy travel boots. Startled by the unexpected presence, he slowly lifted his tear-stained face to see who had found him. Looking up, his wide eyes immediately caught the prominent, pointed horns rising from the stranger's head. Before him crouched an imposing warrior wearing a massive sword across his back, who gently asked why the boy was all alone and observed that he looked hungry. As he looked up in despair, an imposing horned warrior extended a massive hand, offering to share his food and inviting the lonely child to come along. With tears glistening in his eyes, the young boy reached out and took the warrior's weathered hand, allowing himself to be led away from his solitude. Before long, a thick stew filled with meat and root vegetables simmered gently over a crackling campfire. Seated together on a fallen log in the quiet forest, the massive warrior and the small child shared a warm, peaceful meal side by side. Seeing how eagerly the boy devoured his portion, the giant gently cautioned him to slow down so he wouldn't upset his empty stomach. The giant had smiled warmly, asking if the food suited his taste, a memory that echoed into the present, where the apothecary now watched the elven girl being offered a bite at the table. Her face brightened with pure delight as she tasted the dish, exclaiming through tears of gratitude how sweet and delicious it was. He watched her reaction quietly, recognizing in her joy the exact relief he had felt so many years ago. Back then, as a starving outcast, He had looked up through his tears and softly confessed just how good the food tasted. Observing the girl's glowing expression, the woman let out a warm laugh, noting that seeing such genuine happiness made all her effort in preparing the meal completely worth it. Watching her tend to the young elven girl, he quietly acknowledged that he, too, had once been in that same desperate position. He knew in his heart that he had only survived through the grace of another, mirroring the very care he now bestowed upon the wounded elf. Momentarily broken from his reverie when offered a warm meal, his attention was immediately drawn to the window as a messenger bird arrived with a scroll tied to its claw. Hearing the sharp tapping against the glass, he turned to find the dark avian messenger depositing a tightly rolled parchment onto the wooden sill. Unrolling the letter, he explained to his companions that a response had arrived from an old contact regarding the elven girl's dire condition. Reading further, he found that the distant contact mused about how long it had been since they last had the opportunity to examine an elf's unique body. Scanning the rest of the note, he saw that the writer expressed a crude interest in examining her, bluntly demanding compensation while inquiring about his savings. Despite the contact's abrasive nature, he realized he had no choice but to rely on their expertise to treat the severe necrosis spreading across her body. For if this specialist could not assist, he feared the only remaining option would be the horrific amputation of all her limbs. Walking across the open landscape, the apothecary explained that their journey was taking them north to visit an old friend of his. He clarified that they would first have to pass through the forest toward the mountain town of Karuga, where a teleportation shop could instantly warp them farther north. She asked if it worked like a portal, and he confirmed it would save them a massive amount of travel time. Before continuing further, he reached over to place a delicate pendant necklace around her neck. He explained that if she channeled a portion of her magic power into the pendant, it would emit a distress signal. Though he didn't expect them to get separated, he advised her to keep it in mind given the long journey ahead, and she gently agreed. As they trekked deeper into the woods, he ended up carrying her on his back to ease her strain, prompting her to softly apologize, worried that she might be too heavy for him. Reassuring her with a gentle smile, he mentioned that he was used to hauling massive loads of medicinal herbs, making her feel remarkably light in comparison. As darkness fell over the woods, he set up camp, building a crackling fire and preparing a hot meal as he decided it was time to rest for the night. Surrounded by the quiet shadow of the forest, the two sat side by side near the warm glow of the fire, taking a peaceful moment to recharge for the road ahead. Sitting in quiet contemplation by the campfire, he found himself at a loss for words, unsure of what to say now that she was finally able to speak. Breaking the heavy silence between them, she timidly cleared her throat to capture his attention. Sitting across the crackling fire under the shadow of the dense woods, she softly asked if she might learn his name. Taken aback by her gentle inquiry, he paused in mild surprise as she waited patiently for his response. Hesitating for a moment, he offered only his profession, telling her that she could simply address him as the apothecary. A radiant, tender smile illuminated her face as she warmly accepted his answer, greeting him as Mr. Apothecary. Releasing a quiet breath of relief, he agreed with her, silently reaffirming to himself that she had no need to know anything deeper about his past. Haunting images from a dark history continued to weigh upon his soul, reinforcing his belief that he had not earned the right to share his personal life with anyone. Shaking off those gloomy thoughts, he resolved to focus entirely on finishing her treatment and bringing her home safely, until a sudden rustling in the dark tree line forced him to draw his blade. A massive king grizzly emerged from the shadows, looming over their campsite and demanding immediate action as he readied himself for a dangerous confrontation. He quickly assessed the situation, knowing these beasts were exceptionally savage before hibernation. Fleeing with the girl would be nearly impossible, whereas alone he could maneuver freely, leaving him with no option but to stand his ground. As he prepared to draw his weapon and engage, the young elven girl suddenly stepped forward and let out a gentle, resonant call directly toward the towering predator. In an instant, the beast's aggressive snarl faded, its ferocious expression softening as the mysterious melody reached its ears. Turning away without a hint of malice, the colossal bear quietly retreated into the dense forest, leaving the apothecary staring in utter disbelief. She offered a warm, reassuring smile as the creature departed, watching gently as it vanished into the shadows of the woods. He pondered the legendary affinity elves possessed with nature, staring at her in quiet awe as she stood before him. When he asked if she possessed the ability to commune with wild beasts, she humbly confessed she was unsure, admitting only that the giant creature had seemed strangely frightened. He thanked her sincerely for resolving the danger, though a chill ran down his spine as he contemplated what could possibly terrify an apex predator like a king grizzly. An ominous stillness settled over the dark forest path, leaving a haunting question lingering in the night air. Standing in the center of the clothing shop, the apothecary found himself frozen under the icy, judgmental stares of the female attendants. His mind flashed back to how he had landed in this distressing situation, remembering when the local women had pointed out that traveling north would require proper cold weather gear for his young companion. She had tried on an oversized coat that swallowed her tiny frame completely, making it clear that finding properly fitted clothes was an urgent necessity. He had been urged to head into town alone to purchase suitable winter attire and proper undergarments, while the others stayed behind to tend to the patient. He now stood in the middle of the store clutching a bundle of garments, intensely uncomfortable as the store clerks continued to cast dubious glances in his direction. He felt more immense pressure in this moment than he ever had in a monster's lair, but he forced himself to approach a clerk to ask for assistance with sizing the clothing and undergarments. He flinched when the clerk flatly asked if he was buying the women's apparel for himself, prompting him to frantically stammer that the items were intended for his sick sister. He tried to elaborate on his cover story as the skeptical clerk pressed for details, awkwardly explaining that his sister was in such poor health that he had to shop in her place. When asked which specific ailments tormented her, he broke into a sweat and vaguely claimed her whole body was infirm, only heightening the shopkeeper's deep distrust. He squirmed under the crushing weight of their skepticism as the shop assistants immediately saw through his flimsy story. Wondering silently how old an elf sister was supposed to be anyway, his awkward attempts to clarify only made him look even more thoroughly guilty under their icy, judgment-filled glares. Despite the painful ordeal at the shop, the day of departure finally arrived, revealing the fruits of his embarrassing endeavor. Dressed in her new winter attire complete with fur trim and a cozy scarf, the young elf girl looked immensely charming, drawing delighted praise from those nearby as she shyly offered her heartfelt gratitude. Even as praise was showered upon him for his success, a lingering psychological scar remained. Standing stoically amidst their compliments, he found himself utterly haunted, unable to erase the soul-piercing, icy glares of those retail clerks from his mind. Deep within the woods, the apothecary trudged forward, noting the eerie silence and complete absence of wildlife along the path. As he walked, his young companion voiced her own unease about the unnatural atmosphere of the forest. He agreed with her assessment, sensing something amiss and deciding it would be wise to pick up the pace and cross through as quickly as possible. She suddenly froze, trembling in terror as a chilling realization struck her. A massive entity was rapidly closing in on their position. Her ominous feeling was instantly confirmed as heavy, ground-shaking tremors echoed through the dirt beneath their feet. He paused, inhaling deeply to focus his senses before asking if she could pinpoint the direction of the approach, though she could only convey that the impending threat was enormous. She could barely whisper her dread before a sudden, violent movement in the surrounding trees forced him to pivot toward the danger. Before him emerged a massive, mutated giant serpent, its colossal body towering over the trees and revealing the true reason for the forest's silence. Realizing the monster had already targeted them and that battle was inevitable, he swiftly downed a strengthening potion, channeled magical vibrations into his blade, and instructed his companion to stay back while he confronted the beast. Locked in a deadly standoff, his piercing gaze met the cold, reptilian eye of the monstrous serpent as it hissed, leaving the young elf frozen in terror behind him. Without a moment's hesitation, he charged headlong into the fray, matching the giant creature's sudden, snapping strike as it opened its massive jaws to devour him. Executing a series of lightning-fast maneuvers, he leapt high above the lunging beast, striking downwards and leaving deep gashes across its thick scales. Driving his heavy blade deep into the earth, He anchored himself against the monster's thrashing tail, absorbing the immense shockwaves of the violent struggle. Tightening his grip on the hilt, he channeled a potent surge of magical energy into the steel, focusing his breath as the serpent lunged for one final, desperate strike. With a roaring arc of motion, he swung the vibrating sword upwards in a glorious, sweeping crescent that cleaved through the beast's formidable defense. The immense force of the blow ripped through flesh and bone, spraying dark blood across the clearing as the giant serpent writhed in agony. Gasping for air, he stood firm while the colossal body collapsed heavily onto the dirt, completely lifeless after the deadly exchange. Sheathing his weapon and turning back toward the transport cart, he offered a quiet apology for the brief delay. Stunned into silence by his overwhelming display of power, she could only stare in wide-eyed wonder, barely able to whisper his name. She listened silently as the young apothecary crouched beside her, his tone calm and reassuring as he explained that the beast had been subdued before it could threaten any nearby settlements. As she leaned in close, still recovering from the shock of the encounter, his quiet presence provided a sense of warmth and relief. Stepping back slightly, he glanced down at his right hand, noticing the leather of his fingerless glove frayed and stained with dark blood from the ferocious clash. Catching sight of the torn glove and scraped knuckles, she anxiously inquired whether his injury was serious, while he quietly considered taking an antidote to prevent any residual venom from taking hold. Offering her a reassuring smile, he brushed off her concern, assuring her it was merely a minor scratch and encouraging them to keep moving since their destination was nearly within reach. Relief washed over her face, and with a soft smile and tear-filled eyes, she nodded gently in agreement. Having finally reached the bustling town of Karuga, the apothecary led his young companion toward the local teleportation station, eager to secure passage to the northern city where a renowned physician might help treat her injuries. However, as soon as they stepped inside and requested passage, the glasses-wearing clerk behind the desk looked at them flatly and refused their business, leaving the traveler completely stunned. He narrowed his sharp eyes behind his thick spectacles, staring intently at the shivering girl beneath her oversized winter hood. With a weary sigh, the clerk elaborated that the facility could not accommodate a long ear like her, making insinuations about the warrior's motives and provoking an immediate, defensive outcry from him. He slammed his fist forward in anger, loudly insisting that she was merely his patient requiring urgent medical aid in the north, though the receptionist merely brushed off his heated explanation. The prejudice-filled clerk smugly reiterated that their magic transport was strictly meant for human clientele, pointing out that her distinct facial traits and hair color were unmistakable despite her concealed ears, while the apothecary recognized the systemic bigotry prevalent among imperial officials. Yet, after enjoying his display of authority, he leaned over his desk with a subtle, predatory smile to suggest that an exception might still be arranged. The corrupt clerk gleefully explained that she could be registered under a special cargo application, provided the traveler was willing to pay an exorbitant fee for the loophole. Overhearing the degrading proposal, the fragile elf clutched her clothes in shame and burst into tears, desperately apologizing for bringing such humiliation and trouble upon him. Her tears weighed heavily on his conscience, forcing him to swallow his rising fury, knowing that any conflict would only cause her more distress. Turning back to the clerk, he offered to pay double the fee immediately if the man would simply send them through without further delay. Before the clerk could refuse, the traveler leaned in closer, his dark eyes shadowed with an aura so menacing it instantly terrified the man. With a heavy, quiet intensity, he polite yet menacingly urged him to process the transaction gently. Overwhelmed by the crushing pressure, the clerk practically scrambled back from his desk, stammering frantically that he would prepare the teleportation device immediately. Softening his demeanor instantly, he turned back to his companion and cheerfully pointed out that the clerk was about to send them through. Surprised by the sudden resolution, her teary eyes widened as she looked up at him in gratitude. As they stepped onto the glowing teleportation pad, the clerk bowed repeatedly from afar, nervously thanking them for their business and timidly mentioning there was no extra charge needed. A bright surge of magical light engulfed the platform, whisking the pair away from Karuga. Left alone in the quiet office, the clerk wiped his brow, privately admitting to himself that the intimidating youth was definitely no ordinary man. In an instant, the portal deposited them safely in the bustling, snow-covered northern town of Nosbear, a vibrant mountain settlement surrounded by alpine peaks and stone architecture. Adjusting to the crisp, frigid air of the north, he glanced over his shoulder to check on her, gently inquiring if she felt nauseous or fatigued from the instantaneous transport. Still wiping away remnants of tears, she reassured him that she was fine, though her quiet tone betrayed her lingering exhaustion. Seeing her weariness, he suggested they find an inn or local eatery to get dinner and rest for the night. Trying to lift her spirits, he brightened up and excitedly mentioned that the town was famous for a local specialty dish called shigerobe, describing it as fried bread stuffed with savory meat, vegetables, and melted cheese. He led his companion to a cozy local eatery to escape the biting snowstorm, where her wide eyes sparkled with quiet anticipation. She eagerly took a bite of the hot shigerobe, savoring the crisp outer layer and warm, savory filling. Delighted by the meal, she gushed over how crispy, juicy, and delicious it was, surprising him as he had assumed she would prefer more delicate dishes over greasy street food. As they ate, he adjusted the heavy bandages wrapped around his wrist, expressing his hope that a satisfying dinner would help put the unpleasantness at the teleport shop behind them. After finishing their food, they retired to a single room at a nearby inn, lying side by side beneath thick blankets in quiet reflection. He remembered how the innkeeper only had one vacant room with a single bed, and though she had offered to sleep on the hard floor, he had firmly insisted that she take the bed to rest properly. Glancing beside him, he saw her sleeping peacefully right next to him, her steady breaths indicating she had already fallen into a tranquil slumber. His own dark eyes grew heavy with fatigue as he stared upward into the dim atmosphere of the room. Tightening his grip under the bedsheet, he reassured himself that their journey was progressing safely, step by step. With that comforting thought lingering in his mind, he surrendered to exhaustion, silently telling her that they would reach their destination soon. Dragging a heavy wooden sled through a blinding snowstorm, he struggled forward with every breath, his body numbing under the biting freeze. From her bundled seat on the sled, Rizur looked up in concern, asking if he was all right. His face glistened with heavy sweat despite the sub-zero chill as he offered her a weak, reassuring smile, insisting that he was fine and that she shouldn't worry. Deep down, he knew the feverish exhaustion racking his body wasn't merely from physical strain, realizing with growing dread that the monster wound he had sustained earlier was festering, before his eyes caught sight of a sheltered cave opening up ahead. He pulled them inside the stone refuge out of the howling wind, setting up camp to light a crackling fire and offering to heat up the soup they had brought along from the inn. She looked at him with wide, anxious eyes, her voice trembling as she urged him not to push himself beyond his limits. He gave another faint, reassuring smile, brushing off her worries by insisting that he was merely a little tired. He bowed his head in quiet shame as he tended to the small cooking pot over the fire, apologizing for letting his condition deteriorate, though she softly reassured him that it was all right. He lifted a steaming spoon of warm broth toward her with a gentle, patient expression, encouraging her to eat and regain her strength. His trembling hand held out a spoon of warm broth to the young elf, whose eyes welled with overwhelming emotion as she took a bite. As tears spilled down her cheeks, he offered a quiet, remorseful apology, regretting that this simple meal was all he could manage in his failing state. Pressing onward into the howling blizzard, he carried her across the vast, snow-covered mountain, his breath heavy and ragged as he realized he had drastically overestimated his own endurance. Dark reflections weighed on his mind, a grim realization that he should have acknowledged the severity of the monster infection much earlier, instead of foolishly trying to power through the agony. Sweat poured down his burning face despite the freezing air, his mind clouding as he struggled to even form coherent thoughts or utter another word of apology. Desperate to keep moving for her sake, he reached for his magic signal amulet, willing his failing body not to collapse before he could call for aid. But his strength finally gave out, sending him crashing into the deep drifts, causing the young girl to cry out in panic as she tumbled alongside him into the snow. Lying helpless in the snow, his eyes fluttered as his breath grew shallow, leaving her screaming his name in utter desperation. She lay immobilized beside his unconscious body, tears pouring down her face in helpless agony as she realized he had pushed himself to the brink of death purely to protect her. Recalling his instructions regarding the distress amulet, she gathered every remaining ounce of her strength and magic into the charm, determined to save him as a brilliant beacon shot up into the stormy sky. She poured every last drop of her mana into the magic amulet, desperate for its signal light to pierce through the blizzard. In her mind, she pleaded frantically for anyone to notice and come save the kind man who lay helpless beside her. As her magic surged, memories of everything he had done for her flooded her heart. He had rescued her from a dark place, spoken with gentle reassurance, and stood up in anger on her behalf, doing all of it solely for her sake. Driven by these emotions, the pillar of light erupted straight into the stormy sky, carrying her desperate plea to save the gentle man who had restored her hope. However, the sudden surge of power proved too much for the trinket, causing it to crack and shatter into pieces. Her body gave out entirely, and she collapsed into the snow, watching the fading light in dismay as her remaining energy drained away. Beside her, he lay still in the freezing frost, his breathing faint as the snow continued to gather over his silent body. Tears streamed down her face at the realization that the signal had failed, yet she refused to surrender to despair. If she could no longer call for aid, she determined that she would at least cover him with her own body. Dragging herself inch by inch across the frozen ground, she crawled toward his motionless form, desperate to share whatever little warmth her body could offer. Tears dripped onto the snow as she reached out with trembling fingers, clutching his cold hand tightly to hold on to him through the bitter cold. Just as her strength completely failed, heavy footsteps echoed through the howling wind. A tall, mysterious traveler cut through the blizzard, walking straight toward the fallen pair lying in the snow. In a vivid memory from his youth, a large man brought a young, frightened child to a sinister researcher's workshop, pleading for him to examine the boy. The cold physician dismissed the request, complaining that he was busy with his research and preferred fresh corpses over living children, though he begrudgingly reached out a hand to touch the boy's forehead. The boy shuddered under that icy gaze, terrified by the doctor's stitched, unsettling hands and the disturbing feeling that the man viewed him merely as spare parts to dissect. He suddenly snapped back to reality, opening his eyes in a soft bed as the lingering chill of his past dream dissolved into the unfamiliar surroundings of a quiet room. As he tried to gather his bearings, his gaze fell upon his companions seated beside him, one of whom scolded him for failing to follow medical instructions once again. Looking up at the familiar man in spectacles, the apothecary recognized Adam, who remarked on how much time had passed and how much his former pupil had grown since they last met. The doctor explained that both he and the young elf had nearly perished out in the wilderness, emphasizing that they only survived thanks to Ghosh and the girl's extraordinary efforts. Overcome with concern, he urgently asked if the elf was unharmed, relaxing only when Adam assured him that she was safely resting in an adjacent room after exhausting her magic to ensure their rescue. Hearing this truth, he recalled her furious scolding about his reckless overwork and realized that it was his own sheer exhaustion, rather than the monster attack alone, that had nearly pushed him past his breaking point. He could only sit in silence as his companion unleashed a barrage of sharp scolding, berating his habit of rushing into danger without a thought and leaving everything to the last agonizing second. Mumbling a quiet apology, he slumped his shoulders, prompting her sharp tone to soften as she admitted her relief at seeing him alive and safe. However, her tender moment vanished instantly, replaced by a sudden, predatory glint in her eyes as she bluntly demanded to know if he had any cash on him. While settling matters, the physician suggested that more income could easily be earned through extra labor, an idea he flatly and vehemently rejected on the spot. The eccentric practitioner treating them was Adam Ska, an immortal demi-lich who had sacrificed his original body for research and constructed a new flesh form from scavenged parts to satisfy an unquenchable thirst for knowledge. Drawing upon a substantial fortune amassed through his surprisingly frugal habits, he handed over a towering stack of coins, which the doctor happily declared sufficient to fund further material acquisitions. Having secured the payment, Adam Ska turned to attend to the unconscious elf, giving a sudden command to the towering assistant who instantly moved to secure the recovery bed. Heavy iron shackles snapped around his wrists with a loud clatter, pinning his arms above his head and eliciting a shout of utter bewilderment. As he struggled against the bindings and demanded an explanation, the doctor coldly ordered him to remain silent while the formidable assistant kept him firmly trapped. With a chillingly calm expression, Adamska assured him not to worry, promising that she and Aruma would give the young elf a truly thorough medical examination. He watched as his patient reluctantly acquiesced, accepting the necessity of the medical examination. Driven by a morbid excitement at the prospect of working with rare elven anatomy, the doctor gleefully prepared to begin, leaving the restrained warrior shouting in protest behind them. With the elf girl securely strapped to an upright examination table, the physician called upon her assistant to initiate the magical diagnosis outside the secluded manor. Radiance flared across the chamber as complex magical circles projected over her exposed body, scanning every fiber of her flesh and bone. Time passed quietly over the snow-covered estate while the painstaking analysis took place within its isolated walls. After the examination, they gathered over a quiet meal, where the doctor noted that the girl's skin and organs were healing well thanks to previous care, before turning to a far more troubling discovery regarding her sensory organs and limbs. She revealed that the young elf's right eye had been magically sealed shut, while her left eye, though intact, had been completely severed from her nervous system. Processing this horrific revelation, he tightened his fist in silent rage as the doctor reasoned that her body had artificially shut down her sight as a traumatic defense mechanism before moving on to her arms and legs. Explaining that a malicious rotting curse was slowly decaying her extremities from within, countered only by her elven heritage, the physician somberly asked if he already knew the grim truth regarding a potential cure. Without intervention, the spreading affliction would ultimately prove fatal, leaving the young girl looking toward her companion in quiet, solemn uncertainty. As she quietly sliced into her meal, the weight of the doctor's heavy diagnosis began to settle upon her. Looking forward with a starkly calm resolve, she calmly pondered the grim outcome, wondering aloud if she would simply have to amputate all 4 of her limbs. Heavy thoughts weighed on the apothecary as he walked down the quiet corridor, the doctor's grim warning echoing in his mind about the desperate measure of amputating all 4 limbs to save a life. Stepping quietly into the room to check on her, he offered a gentle apology for the intrusion, while an attendant nearby served refreshments to the recovering girl. Upon seeing him, her eyes welled with tears of profound relief as she softly expressed how grateful she was to see that he was safe. Instead of relief, his face remained heavy with sorrow and guilt, unable to meet her joyous gaze. As she attempted to thank him, he immediately deflected the praise, explaining that her use of the magical amulet was what truly saved them, before bowing his head to apologize for placing them in danger through his own misjudgment. Sensing the heavy aura surrounding him as he sat by her bedside, she nervously inquired if something was terribly wrong. His knuckles whitened as he clenched his hands together in agonizing hesitation, struggling to find the words. Lowering his head, he finally delivered the crushing reality, revealing that after a thorough examination by his friend, the severe damage to her limbs threatened her very life unless drastic action was taken. Shadow shrouded his features as he bit his lip in silent agony, tormented by the brutal choice left before them. He sat beside her bed with his head bowed low, forced to break the grim truth. Her damaged limbs would have to be amputated to save her life. She remained motionless, processing the weight of the diagnosis as silence hung heavy between them. Fearing the anxiety his words had caused, he assured her of Dr. Adams' surgical skill and promised he would stay right by her side throughout the procedure. Looking at her anguish, a knot tightened in his chest. He had sworn to himself that he would never let her wear such a heartbroken expression again. He turned his gaze away toward the window, whispering a quiet apology and blaming his own shortcomings for failing to save her without extreme measures. Before his guilt could consume him, her gentle voice cut through his despair, softly calling out to him from the hospital bed. She reassured him that everything would be all right, declaring that her faith lay completely in him. She admitted that while she had yet to meet the head doctor, her trust did not depend on a stranger. She spoke tenderly of how well she knew his kindness and his mastery as an apothecary, easing the heavy burden on his shoulders. Tears welled in her eyes as she offered a warm, trusting smile, confident that the surgery would succeed as long as they faced it together, leaving him completely awestruck by her unwavering devotion. He leaned in closer, gently resting his hand on her shoulder while she expressed her overwhelming gratitude through her tears. Looking into her tear-filled eyes, he quietly encouraged her, asking that they both give everything they had for the upcoming trial, to which she tearfully agreed. Outside the open doorway, the attending medical staff looked on in solemn silence, respecting the quiet moment of shared resolve between patient and caregiver. High in the mountains, the quiet medical estate stood isolated against the rugged skyline as preparations inside drew to a close. Inside the surgical suite, hands snapped into sterile gloves while razor-sharp scalpels and metal instruments were laid out in precise order. Standing over the operating table where she lay prepped under anesthesia, the surgical team readied themselves. The lead doctor announced the start of the procedure, explaining that preserved limbs from cold storage would be used to replace her worst damaged extremities so she would not lose all four. As the sedation deepened, the doctor sternly warned that while these replacements would preserve her mobility, the rehabilitation following the surgery would be grueling. Gazing down through his mask, he gently assured her that everything was going to be all right, prompting her to whisper her complete trust into his hands as her consciousness faded. Her eyes finally slipped closed under the full weight of the anesthetic, just as the tip of the scalpel made its first swift, clean incision into the tissue. Coordinating their duties precisely, the surgeon directed him to perform the central cross-section and core amputation while she prepped the surrounding bone and tissue, a role he accepted without hesitation. He gazed down at the young elf lying motionless under the surgical mask and anesthesia tubes, her quiet breathing a fragile reminder of the stakes. In his mind, he remembered her tearful face and the unwavering trust she had placed in him, whispering her belief in his skills. Channeling that memory to steel his resolve, the apothecary gripped his surgical saw and cast a magical spell to bolster the blade. With unwavering focus and determination flooding his chest, he made the crucial cut, swearing to do everything in his power to break the curse and save her. As the grueling surgery finally came to an end, the weight of the ordeal settled heavily upon the solemn warrior. Sitting exhausted in the room, he listened as the eccentric physician explained that removing his companion's damaged flesh and bone to save her life was bound to leave anyone drained. Though he remained quiet, his stoic expression could not hide the deep anxiety weighing on his mind. The sharp-eyed doctor saw right through his silence, teasingly noting that she could read his thoughts without him having to utter a single word. Turning his gaze away, he quietly stepped over to the bedside where the unconscious elf lay. Reaching out with gentle care, his broad hand tenderly held her small, heavily bandaged ones. Remaining at her bedside, he turned back to the physician with deep sincerity. He softly expressed his gratitude, thanking her for finding compatible body parts capable of saving the girl's life. Hearing his earnest words, she dismissed his gratitude with a carefree, flippant smile. She nonchalantly insisted that saving the elf was merely a fascinating little experiment to satisfy her own medical curiosity. Unable to contain her enthusiasm, she began aggressively rubbing the sleeping elf's newly attached, bandaged arm. She gushed over how the limb had once belonged to a high elf and was bursting with rich, preserved magic, eagerly anticipating the research data, forcing him to exasperatedly ask her to stop fondling the patient. Amidst the doctor's manic banter, a faint movement stirred beneath the sheets. The young elf's long eyelashes fluttered, her luminous, tear-filled eyes gently opening as she slowly regained consciousness. Noticing her awakening, he immediately leaned forward with a look of quiet relief. Calling her name softly, he asked how she was feeling as her teary eyes focused on him, and she whispered his name. She murmured faintly, asking if the procedure was already over. Sitting at her bedside, he assured her that they had made it through without issue, noting with relief that the decay had stopped entirely. Gentle hands supported her as he carefully helped her sit upright in the bed. He warned her that pain would likely return once the numbness faded, urging her to speak up if the discomfort became unbearable. Looking down at her heavily bandaged form, she remarked on how surprisingly light her body felt. He reminded her not to hesitate to ask for pain relief, watching closely as she processed the reality of her newly attached limbs. With both her right arm and leg now fully grafted and wrapped in fresh bandages, she sat quietly on the bed, absorbing the full weight of her miraculous survival. The eccentric doctor chimed in to explain that mobility would take time, as the nerve connections and magical pathways needed space to heal through rehabilitation. Expressing her profound gratitude, the young elf listened as he pledged to oversee her recovery every step of the way. The physician insisted that both patient and caregiver remain under close observation for a while, pointing out that he had pushed himself far past the point of exhaustion and needed rest as well. Curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar name, the elf questioned the childhood moniker the physician kept using for him. He reluctantly admitted it was an old nickname, prompting a wicked grin to spread across the doctor's stitched face. With a theatrical flourish, she declared that once he recovered his strength, both he and Gauche would be serving as her personal workforce to repay the debt. Leaning in with an ominous, wide-eyed glare, she reminded him that this was the second time she had saved a life on his account, making it crystal clear that he would be working tirelessly to earn his keep. A few days later, the physician led them deep into the cavernous, frost-draped cold storage chambers. She casually instructed them to organize the frozen vaults, cheerfully warning them not to wander off unless they fancied freezing to death. Her stern instruction to work as if his life depended on it now made complete sense to him as he shuddered in the freezing subterranean air. He understood that her endless demand for preserved body parts stemmed from a disastrous past experiment, leaving her with a heavily altered physique that required continuous physical material to maintain. Despite her bizarre requirements and blunt nature, he remained acutely aware that both he and his companion owed their very lives to her medical genius. Fueled by resolve, he scrubbed the frozen floors with relentless energy, declaring inwardly that no amount of physical hardship was too great to clear his debt. When his impassioned shout echoed across the stone vault, she casually instructed him to keep his voice down, accompanied by their towering ally who watched on quietly. Outside, soft snowflakes drifted endlessly over the quiet medical compound while he steadily carried on with his sweeping inside. Over the passing days, a steady routine took shape as they shared warm meals, maintained the household together, and helped the recovering elf adjust to her surroundings. Taking her limp hands between his own, he carefully began the delicate work of massaging her fingers to awaken her dormant pathways. He reassured her that the arduous physical therapy was a small effort, explaining that circulation in her newly attached limbs remained weak and needed continuous external stimulation. Suddenly noticing a tiny twitch in her hand, he excitedly pointed out the movement, though she remained hesitant and admitted she could not feel anything yet despite the promising sign. He offered a gentle, reassuring smile, telling her that there was no need to rush. He explained that if they continued with her daily rehabilitation, the day when she achieved full recovery would not be far off. Cradling her frail palm in his own strong hand, he watched as tears welled in her eyes, not from sadness, but from a blossoming sense of hope. Overcome with emotion, she looked up at him through her tear-filled eyes and vowed that when that long-awaited day finally arrived, she would make sure to squeeze his hand in return with all her heart. Her earnest vow touched him deeply, softening his rugged expression into a quiet, warm smile. As their hands remained gently resting against each other, a profound sense of mutual warmth and unspoken gratitude passed silently between them. Preparing to take their leave, the dark-haired warrior offered his sincere thanks for everything done on their behalf. Beside him, the young elf stood quietly, her expression full of gratitude as their departure drew near. Reassuring them both, the eccentric doctor confirmed that the elf's newly attached limbs were healing flawlessly and that all decay had completely vanished. She noted that all that remained was for her caretaker to manage her rehabilitation, prompting both him and the young woman to resolutely promise to give their all. With a subtle smirk, the physician turned her sharp, calculating gaze toward the warrior. Interrupting the moment, she abruptly requested that he step outside for a brief spell, leaving the warrior startled but agreeing to comply. When he questioned what she needed to discuss, the doctor dismissed his curiosity, insisting it was improper to pry into a conversation between ladies. She declared that her massive assistant would carry the patient over while he packed their belongings, ignoring his bewildered murmur regarding her past identity. She countered with a cheeky grin, asserting that disparaging her present body was even more distasteful and warning him against interfering with their private talk. Fixing him with a sharp, cat-like stare, she invoked the strict boundary of doctor-patient confidentiality to seal the matter. Accepting her terms, the warrior relented and stepped out onto the balcony, leaving the two women alone together inside. Now alone with the young elf on the quiet terrace, the doctor gently apologized for bringing her outside, explaining that they had delicate, deeply personal matters to discuss in private. She delivered the grave diagnosis directly to the young elf, explaining that past trauma had severely damaged her reproductive health and bodily functions. As these words sank in, dark fragments of forgotten memories stirred within the girl, though she found herself unable to recall the actual details of the abuse her physical body so painfully remembered. Sensing her distress, the eccentric doctor placed a soothing hand upon her hair, offering a soft apology for burdening her with such painful revelations. Despite her regret, she insisted that as her physician, she was obligated to address the matter directly so they could seek a resolution. Fixing her intense, cat-like gaze on her patient, she revealed that a cure was possible, though it carried immense risks that would ultimately require a difficult choice. Meanwhile, outside the quiet room, Kuro stood alongside the towering warrior Ghosh, his gaze lingering on the closed door as he wondered what delicate matter was being discussed within. Turning away from the door, he followed the massive man down a dim stone stairwell, inquiring about the mystery item he was about to receive. Upon reaching the underground chamber, his eyes widened in utter disbelief as he beheld a sleek, high-tech vehicle resting in the shadows, a legendary air gal. His stunned reaction was met with a simple, quiet nod of affirmation from his companion. Inspecting the machine more closely, he recognized the model immediately, realizing it was the exact same craft once piloted by his former foe. He looked down at the sleek vehicle in disbelief, questioning how such rare dwarven craft came into her hands. The eccentric doctor brushed it off, explaining that someone had pawned it and she simply purchased it, having little use for it herself. Offering a rare, gentle smile, he expressed his sincere gratitude, knowing the craft would spare them a long and perilous trek back through the snow. She warmly agreed, adding that traveling by air would undoubtedly be much easier on the recovering young elf. Observing the quiet giant nearby, a quiet realization struck him. His companion's thoughtfulness extended beyond just himself to ensuring the girl's well-being as well. Mounted atop the high-tech air gal with the girl securely seated behind him, final goodbyes were exchanged with the doctor and the giant as they prepared for takeoff. With a powerful hum, the machine surged forward, kicking up clouds of snow as it glided away from the secluded courtyard. Soaring high above the icy mountain peaks, the craft cut through the frozen sky, while those left behind waved them off from below. Glancing back over his shoulder, he gently inquired if she was managing the biting wind, to which she softly assured him that she felt no cold at all. Yet, as he watched her, his mind drifted back to her private conversation with the doctor, a grave secret that had left her visibly shaken, one he knew he could not press her to reveal. Setting his lingering questions aside, he silently renewed his resolve to protect her, determined to stand by her side whenever she needed him most. He turned to her with a warm, gentle smile, offering his unshakable support whenever she might need it, unaware of the profound secrets weighing on her heart. Overwhelmed by his earnest declaration, she closed her eyes as silent tears streamed down her face, touched yet tormented by his kindness. As the air gal carried them across the endless, snow-capped mountain ranges, she offered him her quiet, heartfelt thanks. Amidst a desolate battlefield strewn with broken blades, haunting memories of defeat clawed at his conscience, reminding him of how his grand ideals and the comrades who followed him had all been shattered. Looking down at his empty, scarred palms, he grieved that everything he had strived for remained utterly out of reach, until a sharp voice broke through his reverie to ask if he was even listening. He remained motionless, his heavily bandaged upper body slouched in silence under the overwhelming weight of his failure. Breaking his quiet trance, he quietly apologized, admitting that his mind had drifted away from their conversation. His companion noted the dark gloom hanging over him, reminding him that while the tragedy was over, none of those who perished would ever return. A stark question lingered in the heavy silence, forcing him to confront what purpose, if any, remained for him to pursue. The harsh inquiry triggered a harrowing memory of a fallen comrade dying in his arms, apologizing for a failed revolution and urging him, with his final breath, to live freely. Pulled back from the brutal vision, he sat in absolute stillness as the ghost of those final words echoed in his heart. Staring blankly into the room, he was painfully aware of the hollow, lightless gaze in his own eyes, void of hope or direction. His mind is haunted by the wide, despairing eyes of those whose lives he has taken, their final horrific moments etched permanently into his memory. Sitting motionless amidst a mental sea of corpses, he comes to a grim realization. He, too, is already dead inside. Gazing down at his open palms, he sees nothing left except dirty, empty hands capable of bringing only pain and regret. Breaking the heavy silence of the room, he tentatively speaks up, asking if he might pose a question to his companion, who quietly inquires what it is he wishes to know. Raising his head with a gaze as hollow and vast as a snow-covered landscape, he earnestly asks what it truly means when someone tells you to simply live however you want. Washing away the dust of the road, the bath area offered a moment of quiet sanctuary. Water splashed gently as instructions were exchanged to rinse off before stepping into the hot tub. Settling into the steaming water beside her dark-haired companion, she was asked if there was enough space, to which she softly affirmed her comfort in sharing the bath together. Sitting side by side, her companion laughed happily, expressing how wonderful it was to soak together and suggesting they make a habit of it far more often. As the steam drifted around them, her companion leaned in closer, quietly praising her strength and resilience, leaving the young elf momentarily taken aback by the sudden compliment. She continued speaking with deep admiration, noting how remarkable it was that such an honest heart and heavy burden could be carried within such a slender frame. Reaching out with a gentle touch, she reiterated her praise, calling the young girl truly strong and commendable for everything she had endured. Shifting the focus to their solemn host, she assured the young elf that he genuinely believed in her potential and would stand by her as she learned to adapt to her newly attached limbs, a realization that resonated deeply in the elf's heart. She went on to describe his long-standing dedication to the village, explaining how he had traveled back and forth to town for years to secure vital medicines, demonstrating a quiet kindness that earned everyone's trust. She listened attentively as Moan noted how much more Kuro smiled nowadays compared to when he first arrived in the village. Continuing their warm conversation, the local women offered their full support, reassuring her that she could depend on them just as much as on Kuro. Deeply moved by their kindness, she admitted through gentle tears that despite her lost memories, this shared warmth felt like having a true family. Right before a lively child splashed into the water and dissolved the moment into cheerful chaos. As the peaceful night faded into morning, light returned to the quiet estate where their daily routine resumed. Back inside, Kuro tended to her physical recovery, carefully switching her treatment to ointment as her surgical wounds healed, before gently suggesting that they trim her long bangs. With a soft expression, he explained that trimming her hair would help her blend in naturally whenever the time came for them to visit the town together. Expressing her quiet gratitude as her newly exposed face brightened, she looked up at him while he mentally remarked on how her scars were fading and her expressions were becoming livelier. Balancing his responsibilities, Kuro returned to his daytime work in the shop while structuring a nighttime rehabilitation regime for her, instructing her to absorb atmospheric mana during the day and use light magical vibrations to stimulate her damaged nerve endings at night. Guiding her trembling hand, he praised her progress as her fingers slowly twitched in response, urging her to maintain her steady practice with magic. Satisfied with her determination despite her lingering post-surgery pain, he brought the intense training session to a close and offered her some freshly delivered cookies as a reward, instantly lighting up her face with joy. She happily accepted the plate of freshly baked cookies offered to her. Kuro encouraged her, reminding her that once she regained full movement in her arm, she could enjoy as many of them as she wished. Chewing blissfully, Tears welled in her eyes at the delicious taste. Emboldened by his promise, she declared with resolute determination that she would work as hard as she could to regain her strength. Over the next month, she maintained her strict routine until one morning. As they began their daily wrist and elbow exercises, a brilliant pulse of magic suddenly flared from her hand. His eyes widened in absolute shock as he felt the warmth of her manna flow into his grasp. Astonished by the radiant surge, he listened as she confessed with a bashful smile that she had spent hours practicing her mana control that morning just to surprise him. Having finally felt true sensation return to her fingers, tears streamed down her cheeks as she squeezed his hands with genuine strength. Overcome with emotion now that she could finally grip his fingers in return. Holding his hand tenderly between hers, she promised that as her recovery progressed, she would squeeze his hand even tighter when the time came, bringing a soft, moved look to his face. He bowed his head in quiet awe, praising her incredible determination and admitting just how deeply her surprise had moved him. Shaking her head timidly, she insisted that her progress was entirely thanks to the patient care he provided night after night. But he gently corrected her, reassuring her that it was her own unwavering grit that made this miracle possible. He remembered how she had secretly pushed through the agonizing pain in bed and practiced moving her fingers every morning upon waking, smiling warmly as he offered her his heartfelt gratitude for holding true to her pledge. With fresh tears blurring her sight, she softly asked if she could hold his hand just a little while longer, to which he readily agreed, offering her comfort for as long as she needed. While she rested far away, night fell across a distant forest, where crisp leaves rustled beneath the glow of a bright, full moon. Echoing through the shadowy canopy, a soft elven voice murmured into the gentle breeze, calling out for her elder sister. Clad in leather armor with a bow in hand and a quiver slung across her back, the lone warrior stood under the moonlight, desperately wondering where her kin could have vanished. Inside the quiet room, the apothecary noticed how much control the young elf had regained in her hands. He suggested that it was time she began practicing to feed herself, encouraging her to take all the time she needed. Determined to regain her independence, she gladly agreed, expressing her earnest wish to eat on her own. Moments later, a steaming bowl filled with warm, hearty meatballs and savory broth was placed onto the wooden table. To assist her, he carefully bound a wooden spoon directly to her bandaged right hand with cloth wraps, asking if the arrangement felt secure. She looked down at the makeshift modification with bright approval. Guiding her hand toward the bowl resting in front of her, the man offered gentle assistance to help her start. Expressing her gratitude, she carefully maneuvered the spoon into the broth. With trembling concentration, she managed to scoop up a round meatball, prompting a soft gasp of pleasantly surprised admiration from him. Her cheeks flushed with intense focus and emotional buildup as she prepared to take her very first bite entirely by herself. Opening her mouth wide, she successfully brought the spoon to her lips and tasted the hot food, her large eyes widening with overwhelming joy. Turning her tear-filled eyes toward the apothecary, she proudly declared that she had done it. As she chewed contentedly with a beaming smile, he offered her a warm, heartfelt smile of his own, praising her hard work and milestone achievement. He offered a warm smile, asking if she was enjoying the fish paste dumplings and whether she had any trouble eating, to which she bashfully assured him that she was doing fine. Scraping the bottom of her empty bowl, she hesitated for a moment, clearly wanting more. Catching on immediately, his face flushed with excitement as he eagerly offered to serve her another portion. Clasping her spoon tight with a deep blush spreading across her cheeks, she softly admitted that she would love seconds. Ladling another warm serving from the steaming pot, he was delighted that regaining her ability to eat on her own had brought back her full appetite. Pushing Nyan through the quiet paths in the wooden wheelchair crafted by the village carpenter, Kuro inquired if the journey felt too rough for her. She reassured him that she was perfectly comfortable, taking in the pleasant surroundings and mentioning the dense magic lingering in the air before suggesting it was time to eat. Heeding her suggestion, he brought their journey to a pause and set down their heavy travel pack nearby. Unpacking their provisions while sitting beside her wheelchair, he prepared a warm meal for them under the open sky. Handing her a mug of hot soup, he offered the fresh meal with quiet care. As she accepted it with a grateful smile and admired its inviting aroma, he noted with relief that her grip strength was steadily returning. Enjoying the warm broth beside him, she savored the quiet comfort of the moment. He sat closely by her side, keeping watch over her as they shared the peaceful respite together. Sudden movement nearby abruptly broke their quiet calm, drawing both of their glances toward the rustling foliage as she let out a quiet gasp of surprise. A small, long-eared forest creature hopped lightly into view, boldly perching itself right on her lap to announce its arrival. Delighted by the friendly visitor, she broke into a soft giggle, marveling at how fearlessly the tiny creature made itself at home in her presence. Cradling the gentle beast against her chest, she beamed with genuine happiness, while he looked on with a soft, affectionate expression. Beyond their small clearing, a gentle woodland breeze rustled the leafy branches, carrying quiet leaves across the peaceful sky. Sitting together in the tranquil forest, Nyan softly called out to her companion. Kuro turned his head toward her, asking what was on her mind. With a warm, heartfelt smile, she expressed just how much she had come to adore this place and the kind people who lived here. Gazing softly into his eyes, she confessed her quiet wish to stay and live here forever alongside him. As she gently spoke his name, a heavy shadow fell across his features, and he instinctively lowered his gaze, weighed down by an unspoken burden. Silent specters of his grim past seemed to reach from the darkness, skeletal hands clawing at his back as the bloody horrors he carried refused to release their grip. Nearby, the small forest creature suddenly twitched its long ears, sensing the abrupt shift in the heavy atmosphere. Startled as the little animal bounded away, Nyan broke the uneasy silence, asking him gently if his lost memories had still not returned. She began to apologize for lacking answers, but he quickly cut her off, quietly telling her there was no need to apologize. He explained that seeing her steady recovery gave him hope that regaining her memories might allow them to find her true home, leaving her stunned by the sudden mention of her long-forgotten origins. Remembering how desperate she had been to return to her family when they first met, he reasoned that her hometown must have held immeasurable importance to her, even if those cherished days remained locked away for now. He firmly cut off her gratitude, insisting that she owed him no thanks whatsoever for his care. Nyan listened in quiet surprise as he bowed his head, explaining that his actions were far from selfless. Revealing that he had only aided her recovery for his own personal ends, he asked if she would listen to his story. Sensing the deep weight behind his words, she quietly agreed to hear him out. As his mind drifted into the distant past, he recalled losing his parents at a tender age and being taken in by a compassionate demon who raised him as his own. He spoke fondly of his guardian's immense kindness, crediting him with providing everything he had and introducing him to Adam. Nyan processed this revelation in quiet reflection. Yet the warmth of those memories gave way to a grim truth. As he grew older alongside his savior, he turned into a cold-blooded killer, leaving Nyan visibly shaken by the confession. He detailed how the demons had plotted a coup against the ruling Iruta clan, who were ruthlessly oppressing other races, leading his adoptive savior to rise as the leader of the revolutionary army. Driven by admiration for his savior's noble vision of equality for all races despite being an Iruta himself, he eagerly volunteered to join the revolutionary forces. Recognizing that the Iruta lacked the physical strength of demons, he chose to serve in a supportive role rather than on the front lines as a warrior. That support, however, was lethally covert. He served as an assassin, harvesting obsidian spider poison and refining apothecary techniques, while sharpening his vibration magic Paruma as a deadly tool. In the name of a righteous cause and for the sake of his comrades, he slaughtered countless lives, Iruta, elves, dwarves, and beastfolk alike, leaving his very soul and body bound to a dark, blood-soaked history. His hands remained permanently stained in blood, haunted by the lingering shadows of every life he had taken. Even now, he could vividly recall the face of each target whose breath he had extinguished. To ensure success, he had meticulously studied every detail of his marks, observing their routines, their homes, and their families, knowing that an assassination carried out without proper preparation was bound to fail. Etching those intimate details deep into his mind was the only way to maximize his chances, forcing his heart to harden against any lingering traces of doubt. His very first kill had been a high-ranking aristocrat named Iruta, a powerful figure residing in a grand palace at the center of the nation's high society. Infiltrating the estate in complete silence, he drew his dagger behind the noble, who sat comfortably enjoying his wine, entirely unaware that his grandchild was expected to be born the following week. Such personal circumstances meant nothing to him then. With a swift, cold strike, he slashed open the noble's throat, spraying crimson across the room. As the lifeless aristocrat slumped in his chair, a heavy, suffocating stillness blanketed the bedchamber. His gaze caught a small picture book sitting on a side table, making him realize that the old man had lovingly prepared a storybook for the child he would now never get to meet. Fleeing into the night, he ran through the darkness with heavy, ragged breaths, shaken by the lingering memory of that blood-stained past. He found himself sickened to his stomach time and again, doubled over in the dark woods after taking a life. For instance, a high-ranking official who made a habit of drinking morning coffee met his end when poison was slipped into his cup. The spilled dark liquid served as a grim reminder of the fatal dose consumed in seconds. Yet the association lingered. Every time he tried to raise a cup to his own lips afterward, the memory resurfaced. By the very next morning, the taste of coffee had become utterly repulsive to him. Mission after mission followed, a relentless cycle of archery, stabbings, and cold slashes where target after target was cut down. Before long, numb apathy replaced his remorse. He no longer vomited after a contract, and coffee tasted normal again. Yet every face he had ended remained permanently seared into his mind. Surrounded by spectral visions of his countless victims, he felt no fear, accepting these haunting ghouls as the natural consequence of his blood-soaked trade. Once that bloody career finally drew to a close, he sought a path toward redemption. Sitting before the young woman, he confessed that he had turned his knowledge toward becoming an apothecary, admitting that saving her life was nothing more than an effort to atone for his past sins. He remembered the moment he had walked through her doorway, a chance encounter that bound their fates together. Standing before her now, he felt as though that memory was a haunting reminder of the lives he had previously destroyed. He was tormented by the thought that among the many he had killed, countless victims had died, longing only to return to their homes. When he had first discovered her, she was collapsed upon the floor, agonizing under the grip of a deadly venom. The swift creation of an antidote had only been possible because he spent years mastering poisons for the opposite, lethal purpose. He knew that his past and present selves were inseparable, making it impossible to ever truly erase the blood on his hands. Bowing his head in deep regret, he insisted that a man like him had no right to remain beside her, calling himself nothing more than a hypocrite. Rejecting his harsh self-judgment with tears in her eyes, she gathered all her strength to shout that to her, he would always be a savior. Hearing the apothecary dismiss himself as a mere hypocrite, the young woman pondered his confession, reflecting deeply on the lingering questions she had carried in her heart. She recalled how he had devoted so much time and energy to care for her, despite her having no memory of him, no knowledge of his past, and not even recognizing his face. Yet through it all, his gentle touch and selfless care had given her solace. Rejecting his harsh self-assessment, both her heart and body knew the truth of how remarkably kind he truly was, refusing to let his dark guilt obscure the warmth he had shown her. To her, he was neither a hypocrite nor a monster. He was, unequivocally, her savior. Her ear twitched as she softly voiced her gratitude, thanking him directly from the depths of her soul. But her words seemed to fall into a void. He sat motionlessly, staring down in despair as she realized with horror that her voice was failing to reach him at all. Enveloped in an overwhelming shadow, he sat completely consumed by a profound despair that isolated him from the world around him. Tears welled in her eyes as she desperately searched his face, wondering what sorrowful expression was hidden beneath his bowed head. Staring at his slumped figure, she agonized over her inability to tell whether he was weeping or enduring unbearable physical torment. He confessed softly that while he was glad she felt so deeply, his kindness and strength were driven entirely by his desperate need for atonement. Yet, she listened with a full heart, knowing that the warmth she had received from him was genuine, regardless of the guilt that fueled it. Refusing to accept that his past defined everything, she firmly believed that the care he had shown her was never a lie. Looking at his huddled, broken figure, she saw the massive wall of guilt he had built around his heart, suggesting he distance himself from her now that he was beginning to recognize his own agony. As she reflected on how heavily he carried that hidden darkness, she regretted relying on him so blindly while failing to notice his deep inner pain, resolving that she could no longer stand by and do nothing. Desperate to help him break free, she pleaded for any clue, a memory, a scent, or a familiar landscape that might anchor him, declaring her unwavering desire to remain by his side. Driven by a sudden wave of indignation against her own helplessness, she reached forward with all her might, shouting her refusal to surrender to despair. Shattering the unseen barrier that isolated his suffering, her voice broke through the silence as she cried out her desire to truly reach him. She yearned with every fiber of her being to pierce beyond that fortress of guilt, desperate to see the true man hidden deep within the shadows. Suddenly, a brilliant radiance burst through the darkness, stripping away his solemn veil and revealing the authentic savior beneath. Tears welled in her wide, trembling eyes as the reflection of his true self emerged clearly before her, locking them in an unbreakable bond of mutual understanding. She gently described his visual features, mentioning his dark hair and deep red eyes as he listened in stunned silence. Hesitant and confused, he asked if she was speaking about a friend or a relative, unable to comprehend what was happening. Before he could finish his thought, her soft hand reached up, gently brushing against his jawline. The warm contact froze him in place, his breath catching in surprise. Tears streamed down her face as she smiled, remarking that she could finally see what his face truly looked like. Staring into her eyes, he stammered in disbelief, desperately asking if her vision had truly returned. With tears overflowing, she confirmed with pure joy that she could see him clearly, every detail of his face perfectly restored to her sight. As a single tear fell between them, she embraced him tightly, begging him not to leave her behind. Feeling her touch and hearing her desperate plea, his stern expression dissolved into tears as a soft, relieved smile broke across his face. Seeing his genuine emotion, she wept softly, reaffirming that she always knew he possessed such a kind heart. She wept openly, her cheeks flushed with overwhelming emotion as she expressed her profound gratitude for the kindness and happiness he had brought into her life. Because of this heartfelt confession, he knelt beside her in the open field and offered his tender embrace, sealing the moment as the invisible wall that had kept them apart finally crumbled. Entering the workshop for the very first time, the young woman was invited on a complete tour of the premises. From the cozy retail storefront to the quiet kitchen and the lush garden out back, every corner of the property was showcased with pride. Her eyes sparkled with genuine wonder as she took in the beauty of her surroundings, deeply moved by the restoration of her home and sight. Observing her reaction, the apothecary remarked on how wonderful the place truly felt, prompting her to express her gratitude that he had grown so fond of it. Transitioning to her physical rehabilitation, the two sat opposite each other at a wooden table, though her heart pounded rapidly with nervousness at his gentle touch. As he guided her to stand up slowly for the next phase of training, her overwhelming flutter of emotions caught her off balance, causing her to lose her footing and tumble forward. In a sudden crash, she landed directly on top of his chest on the floor, frantically apologizing as she checked if he was unharmed. Looking up at her with a gentle gaze, he reassured her that his own foot had slipped as well, softly asking if she was unhurt. Lying pressed against his chest, she could only stare down at him in stunned silence, barely able to process his sweet words. Overwhelmed by intense embarrassment, she felt her entire face burn with heat as her head spun from the sheer awkwardness of the moment, while the young man looked on in utter shock. Seeking to hide her burning face, she buried her nose in her hands and squeezed her eyes shut, trying in vain to cool her frantic thoughts. Returning to her table, she stared at her small mirror and chided herself for her weakness, knowing he was pushing so hard only to help her recover while she merely wallowed in bashfulness and dependency. Gazing deeply into her own reflection, a quiet determination took root within her, prompting a desire to grow strong enough to support him in return, even if she could not achieve it right away. Driven by this newfound resolve, She swore to herself that she would reach a point where he would never have to utter such painful words again. Her intense concentration was suddenly shattered when he quietly opened the door and asked if she had a moment, causing her heart to leap into her throat as a fresh wave of heat flushed her cheeks. Standing in the doorway with a gentle, reassuring expression, he explained that some visitors had arrived to see her. As he prepared to escort her out, he softly requested that she close her eyes for a brief moment to surprise her. Complying without hesitation, she sat quietly as he gently rolled her wheelchair forward, the wooden wheels clacking softly against the floorboards of the corridor. Entering the brightly lit main room with her eyes still shut, she felt the warm presence of two familiar guests who stood eagerly awaiting her arrival. She let out a quiet breath, tears welling up along her closed eyelids as anticipation gripped her heart. Leaning in close, the apothecary softly reminded her that deep down, she already knew exactly who was standing right before her. The young visitors could hardly contain their excitement, encouraging her to finally open her eyes and see them at last. As her eyelids slowly parted, her vision cleared to reveal the tearful, beaming faces of her cherished companions, bringing her long-awaited wish to fruition. Overjoyed, the sisters presented her with a vibrant bouquet of fresh flowers, weeping tears of pure happiness as they congratulated her on her recovery. Surrounded by a shower of delicate petals, she looked upon them with wide, glistening eyes, completely overwhelmed by the warmth of their gesture. She softly asked if the flowers were truly meant for her, to which they eagerly confirmed, explaining that upon hearing of her healed vision, they had gone out to handpick the bouquet just for her. Clutching the vibrant bouquet close to her chest, she beamed through her tears, offering them her deepest and most heartfelt gratitude. Seeing the joyous reunion, the silent apothecary offered to let the guests stay for a meal, prompting the excited companions to instantly volunteer to help prepare a festive feast. Soon, the quiet haven filled with the lively rhythmic sound of chopping blades and cheerful chatter as everyone joined together to prepare the celebratory meal. Admiring her gentle features, Moan warmly remarked on how beautiful her eyes were, contrasting them with the apothecary's notoriously intense gaze. The young woman blushed, flustered by the unexpected compliment. Shifting her gaze toward the kitchen where he was busy chopping ingredients, she softly admitted that she actually found his stern eyes quite charming. Hearing this sudden confession, Moan gasped in shock. Across the room, he continued preparing the meal with a serene composure, quietly enjoying the lively atmosphere far more than he usually let on. Studying her flushed face, the young guest suddenly pieced the clues together, her eyes widening as she wondered out loud if the two of them were actually dating. Mortified by the accusation, she squeaked in protest, her face turning crimson as the visitors teased her about her obvious feelings while questioning if her reaction was just hunger. Desperately trying to deny it, she insisted that it wasn't hunger at all, though her overwhelming embarrassment only made her companion chuckle at her innocent denial. Steam practically radiated from her overheating cheeks, prompting the warrior in the kitchen to chime in lightheartedly, suggesting he had better hurry up with the food. Before long, a delicious spread of hot savory dishes and freshly baked pie was served, filling the cozy home with appetizing aromas. As the meal came to an end, the guests decided it was time to take their leave, with the warrior insisting he could manage the post-dinner cleanup on his own. At the doorway, the visitors warmly invited her to drop by whenever she wished, leaving her deeply grateful as they said their fond goodbyes. She blushed furiously as Moan leaned in close, whispering a teasing query about whether she and the stoic apothecary were secretly a couple. Her sudden, high-pitched shout of disbelief shattered the quiet, causing the muscular apothecary to spin around in utter confusion. Flustered and waving her hands, she scrambled to explain that she had done nothing wrong, while the rest of the group watched her frantic reaction in amusement. Turning her sharp gaze upon the bewildered craftsman, Moan slammed her hands on the table and chided him for his obliviousness, scolding him for failing to clarify the nature of their household. He could only tilt his head in silent bafflement as she abruptly dismissed the topic with a cough, ordering him to return to washing the mountain of dishes. With him safely occupied at the sink, Moan leaned toward the embarrassed maiden to reveal that she was actually married, though her husband was frequently away on business trips. Mortified by her own misunderstanding, She hid her glowing face and apologized for asking such an awkward question, but Moan chuckled warmly and gently patted her soft hair. The elder woman pointed out that such worry only demonstrated the depth of her feelings. Blushing deeply, the young maiden softly confessed to herself how much she treasured the savior who had been so kind to her. She slowly squeezed her right hand into a tight fist, marveling at how her restored vision and improving physical strength were slowly returning her independence. Looking up at his quiet profile with renewed resolve, she swore to work tirelessly to regain her strength so she could stand by his side as a capable helpmate rather than a burden. Taking a bite of the remaining cheese pie, the young elf was instantly overwhelmed by its rich, savory flavor, tears of pure delight swelling in her eyes as she flushed with pleasure. She savored the luscious taste, marveling at how the sweetness and the saltiness of the cheese blended together, while the dark-haired apothecary observed her enthusiastic enjoyment with quiet amusement. Looking up into his intense crimson gaze, she caught her own reflection in his eyes and suddenly felt deeply self-conscious. Realizing her puffed-out cheeks made her resemble a squirrel hoarding food. Her mind drifted back to their recent female visitors, recalling how elegant Ain was with her graceful table manners and how adorable Moan appeared, leaving her feeling awkward and plain in comparison even as he offered her another bite. Overcome by a sudden wave of embarrassment and self-consciousness, she placed her food down, tearfully thanking him for the meal while declaring that she had had enough for the day. With a sharp clatter, her fork slipped from her grasp and tumbled onto the table, making the young man drop his utensil in sheer shock. Instantly alarmed by her sudden distress, he leaned hastily across the table and pressed his broad hand against her forehead, frantically asking if she had developed a fever, lost her appetite, or felt unwell. As he obsessively checked her racing pulse and worried aloud whether her pain medication was causing an adverse side effect, she panicked in utter embarrassment, her heart thumping violently against her chest from his sudden physical closeness. Struggling through her tears, she confessed how deeply she admired Ain-san, overwhelmed by her own feelings of self-doubt while trying to explain herself to him. As she recalled how bright, cheerful, and radiant Ain-san always appeared, she admitted feeling far inferior, only to be caught off guard when he suddenly let out an amused snort. Reassuring her gently, he told her there was no need to fret over such comparisons, though she flusteredly insisted that her worries were entirely genuine. Gazing directly at her, he softly explained that while Ain-san possessed her own charm, she was wonderful in a completely unique way, adding that the bright, delighted expression on her face while enjoying a meal was just one of countless things he treasured about her. He went on to express how deeply satisfying it was to watch her recover and put in so much effort, leaving her completely speechless and blushing at his unexpected honesty. Overcome with overwhelming happiness, she happily dug back into her dessert with tears of joy, determined to finish every remaining crumb. Savoring her meal alongside him in peaceful contentment, she quietly realized that even if she was far from perfect, receiving his genuine praise was all she truly needed to feel at ease. As the apothecary worked tirelessly around his shop, tending to daily customers and sorting through his inventory, the young elf watched him with a gentle sigh, wishing she could find some way to ease his heavy workload. Sitting by the open window, she watched a small songbird land on the sill, whispering aloud how wonderful it would be if she possessed the means to truly help him. She greeted the feathered visitor warmly as it chirped at her, offering a faint, grateful smile and assuring the attentive creature that she was all right despite her lingering worries. Their quiet moment was broken when a battered traveler called out from the doorway, prompting the apothecary to rush over and attend to the man, who explained that he had barely escaped a ferocious bear attack while traveling. As he carefully bandaged the traveler's wounded arm, the apothecary observed how the disruption in the flow of magic had spawned countless monsters, making simple commercial journeys life-threatening. The injured man went on to describe the unsettling atmosphere in the forest and the dangerous beasts roaming within, inquiring if there were any known ways to avoid such encounters, which reminded the apothecary of his own recent perilous run-in with a mutated creature. Suddenly, a vivid realization struck him as he recalled how the young elf's melodic voice had previously caused a raging beast to halt and retreat without violence. Meanwhile, she absorbed the traveler's distress with a heavy heart, troubled by the thought of helpless merchants coming under attack in the wilderness. Turning to her, he asked whether her singing had been what deterred the wild beast before, prompting her to realize that the creature had indeed fled the instant she began her melody. She offered a gentle apology for frightening him earlier, explaining her desire to project a sense of safety that could soothe wild beasts rather than provoke them. Contemplating her words, he began to analyze the fundamental nature of sound, suddenly recalling ancient ruins outfitted with mandragora traps that blared piercing cries upon activation. Realizing that sound was merely physical vibration, he pondered whether his own aroma magic could replicate those acoustic waves. Turning to her across the table, he asked if she would assist him in testing this new magical concept. Overjoyed at the prospect of being helpful, she eagerly agreed, prompting a warm smile of gratitude from him. He then produced a large, diamond-shaped solid mass mana core and set it on the wooden table between them. He detailed his plan, explaining that while he normally shaved such cores for medicine, he would now carve a magic circle into this one to capture and store the precise vibrations of her voice. As she prepared to sing, internal relief washed over her, knowing she was no longer powerless and could finally aid the man who had cared for her. Filling the room with her beautiful song, she channeled her soothing energy into the crystal, thrilled that her voice might ease the burdens of both troubled travelers and frightened creatures. Upon finishing her melody, she admitted that while her past remained forgotten, the song felt deeply familiar and nostalgic, as he successfully empowered the core to store and replay her magic. He announced that the recording artifact was complete, proposing to produce several more to sell to passing merchants, and asked if she was comfortable with that idea. She quickly assented with enthusiasm. Expressing his deep gratitude, he thanked her warmly. Surprised by his sincerity, she wondered privately why she had felt any hesitation at all, given that the endeavor benefited others while earning coin. She reflected on how tirelessly he worked every day, managing his expenses with strict frugality, and realized he must have spent a considerable fortune on her own medical care. Resolving to support him in return, she summoned her courage while he took a seat across from her, though the words initially caught in her throat. Sensing her sudden tension, he looked up and softly asked what was troubling her, causing her cheeks to flush as her heart pounded in her chest. Frustrated by her own clumsiness with words, she struggled to articulate her feelings, reminding herself of everything he had done for her and forcing herself to overcome her anxiety to speak clearly. With eyes glistening and a deep blush spreading across her face, she poured out her heart, asking if she could officially work alongside him in his workshop. He listened in quiet astonishment, absorbing the earnest resolve in her request.